It was time to say goodbye to Mike Williams. 2 months after he went missing, several hundred people dressed in black shuffled slowly into Thomasville Road Baptist Church in Tallahassee. Everyone from Mike's life was there. Family, friends, the guys he hunted with, played high school football with, the people he worked with, and of course, the 3 people he'd been closest to since school: Brian, Kathy, and his wife, Denise.
I remember her coming in and her dad, pretty much holding her up as she walked in.
Blythe Newsome remembered being in the same church for Mike and Denise's wedding just 6 years earlier.
And you just feel so helpless when someone's grief is so great. And she showed it. And it was everywhere in that room. And it just wasn't fair.
The mourners sat and watched photographs of Mike flash on a screen at the front of the church. Then the eulogies began. There was Mike, the loyal friend, Mike, the enthusiastic hunting buddy, Mike, the devoted husband and father. Mike's boss, Clay Ketchum, had been asked to get up and speak.
I couldn't do it, Lionel. I tried in my heart to do it, and I couldn't.
Mike's disappearance had hit him hard, but he'd also been worried about Denise. Ever since the search had been called off, she'd hardly left her bedroom.
I think Denise was unsure as to what the next step is. I can't imagine anything more horrible to go through.
It had been Clay's wife, Patty, who had suggested the idea of this gathering in the church.
Patty said, well, Denise, he's not coming back. And she said, I really think a memorial service to honor Mike it will help you move on. And I think you've got to move on.
Denise was hesitant at first, but as the service went on, Patty's advice seemed to be working.
It was a very nice memorial. I think it gave Denise closure. I think in one sense it gave all of us some degree of closure to it.
But there was someone else in the church that day who didn't see the memorial service as the end of anything. It was Cheryl Williams, Mike's mom. Though she sat quietly with Mike's brother, those closest to her knew that this gathering was not of her choosing. Since Mike went missing, Cheryl had not swayed from her belief that Mike was not in Lake Seminole.
She was adamant that there was foul play, but she didn't know exactly what happened, and she didn't know exactly why this would have happened. But it was just, her feeling.
Cheryl was convinced there were still questions to be answered. It wasn't yet the right time to move on. And it was that insistence that would put her on a collision course with Denise, one that would tear their families apart.
Mike Williams set off on a hunting trip into the swamps of North Florida, where it was thought he met a gruesome fate in the jaws of hungry alligators. Except that's not what happened at all. And after the uncovering of a secret love triangle, the truth would finally be revealed. Binge all episodes of Over My Dead Body Gone Hunting right now, ad-free on Wondery Plus.
From Wondery and Campside Media comes Season 3 of the hit podcast Suspect. This is a story of 2 victims, one murdered in cold blood, one imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. Listen to Suspect, 5 Shots in the Dark, wherever you get your podcasts, or binge all 8 episodes ad-free on Wondery Plus.
From Wondery, I'm Jennifer Portman, and this is Over My Dead Body, Gone Hunting.
Baby, I'm guilty. I got his blood on my hands.
Baby, you're crazy. I never touched that man.
This is episode 2. Tell that to the alligators. From the first days after Mike's disappearance, Cheryl didn't buy what law enforcement thought had happened to Mike, that he'd somehow fallen off his boat, drowned, and then been eaten by alligators. None of it made sense to her. Mike was an experienced hunter and a strong swimmer, used to the dangers of waders. But when she raised these doubts with law enforcement, she got brushed off. "Tell that to the alligators, Miss Williams," one officer told her. When she suggested a land search in addition to the lake search, officers asked, "Why? Mike's in the lake." When she asked the police to obtain phone records for Mike, Denise, and their friends, the authorities ignored that too. But Cheryl made it clear she wasn't going to sit idly by while law enforcement did their thing. She was going to run her own investigation. And like a seasoned detective, she realized her first task was to talk to the people closest to her son, build out a timeline, and look for the pieces that didn't quite fit. Soon after, Cheryl spoke to Denise. She wanted to know the last time Denise had seen Mike. She noted down the conversation in her journal. Denise said, "I saw Mike at 3 a.m. on the 16th. Denise told her Mike had been planning to go hunting with his best friend Brian. But in the early hours of the morning, Mike changed his plans. He woke me up to tell me Brian had called and canceled. Brian wasn't coming, so Mike was going on his own. He would be back by 12 p.m. So Denise stayed home that morning with Ansley and planned to pack for their trip. When Mike didn't return by 1 p.m., she had called her sister. Next, Cheryl asked about Brian and his wife Kathy. Where had they been that day? She said, "Why do you want to know?" I told her I wanted to put everyone in place the day Mike disappeared. Denise told me Brian and Kathy spent the day together. Cheryl always liked Denise. Sure, her son Nick thought Denise was a bit snooty because of her upbringing, but Cheryl never felt that. She had grown to love her daughter-in-law. But the more Cheryl talked to Denise about Mike's disappearance in the weeks after, the more she pushed for information, the more Denise got irritated. I spoke to Denise today. I told her I was trying to get the police to look at Mike's disappearance. She got upset and said, "Why would you do that? He drowned and alligators ate him." Cheryl was bewildered by this conversation. Denise had always shied away from talking directly about death. When Cheryl's husband had died, Denise would describe him as being, quote, away. And now, less than a month after Denise's own husband had vanished, she was absolutely certain he was not away or missing or some other euphemism, but instead very much dead and eaten up by alligators. To Cheryl, it felt suspicious. For months after, Cheryl would continue to note the behaviors and actions of everyone around her, desperate for a clue to emerge. Then, one afternoon, one did. It was a humid day in June. Game warden Alton Renew was in his recliner watching a Western when he heard a knock at his door. It was a local fisherman.
He said, "Buddy, I think we need to go up here to the lake. I found some waders floating." I said, "Really?"
Ever since the search was called off 5 months earlier, Alton had kept up a daily patrol of the lake. As the weather warmed up, he'd been expecting Mike's body to surface. He'd been a warden long enough to know all bodies come up eventually. But there'd been no trace until now.
We took my boat and went out there. Sure enough, there was a set of waders.
They were floating just beneath the surface near the deepest part of the lake. As he got closer, Alton could see the shoulder straps were folded down.
As if you were taking them off and pulled them down to your waist.
As if someone had fallen in while wearing them. Word traveled fast around town about the new discovery. When Mike's friend Scott Dungy heard about it, he snapped into action.
I called a friend of mine, Lamar, who has done a ton of cave diving and done a lot of body recoveries for the local sheriff's offices around town. And I called him and he went out there with us.
They took the boat out to where the waders were found. It was now summer, and the lake was overrun with a thick layer of hydrilla, an aquatic weed. It was going to make it hard to see anything down there. As he watched Lamar get ready to dive, Scott braced himself for what could be down there.
I asked him before he went in, I said, Lamar, what do you expect him to find? And he said, I'm expecting to just find bones and maybe a skull or something.
Lamar disappeared under the water, and Scott waited.
And within 2 minutes, he pops up with a jacket.
A hunting jacket with a green camouflage pattern.
And one of the sleeves is turned inside out. I stick my hand into the jacket and I pull out a hunting license.
A piece of white paper about the size of an index card. The name on it read, Mike Williams.
I remember looking at it thinking, this is unbelievable paper. It's been in the water for 6 months and I can read it plain as day.
While Scott was staring at the license, Lamar surfaced again.
Lamar comes up with a little flashlight and hands it to me, and first thing I do is click it, see if it worked, thinking there's no way it works. It's been in the water for 6 months, and hell, it worked too. And so I thought, wow, I got to get me one of these.
But that wasn't all Lamar had found at the bottom of the lake.
He said I ran into a bunch of alligator poop, and all of the hydrilla was all tumbled over, like when an alligator goes into those death rolls. He said I could tell where an alligator had been in there, just spinning.
An alligator doing death rolls. An alligator that had maybe consumed Mike. Game Warden Alton Renew had always had a lot of questions about what happened to Mike. The lack of any physical evidence was just odd. Now, as he inspected the waders back at his house, he thought he could finally get some answers. Alton put his nose to the opening of the waders. Maybe Mike died in these boots. Maybe an alligator dragged him to the bottom, or perhaps he simply drowned. But either way, Alton figured they would smell rancid, like death.
But there was no smell in the boots at all.
Then he looked inside.
It was nothing but water and hydrilla, grass particles and such as that came out of it. There was no human parts whatsoever.
If Mike had drowned in his waders, like everyone had been saying, shouldn't some part of him still be in those waders?
Some people were saying, well, the alligators got him. They ate him and pulled him out. Nope, there wasn't any alligator bites in the waders. The waders were fine.
And anyway, Alton had never bought into the alligator theory. Ever since Mike had gone missing, people had kept telling him about it.
Okay, here we go again. And then I would explain to them about the alligators. Don't eat that time of the year. Alligators ain't gonna mess with him. And then they wouldn't believe that. Oh, man, I seen alligators eat dogs out there in December. No, well, you may have. You shouldn't have had your dog in the water.
Then there was the jacket with the flashlight and the hunting license that Mike's friend Scott Dungy had found.
Let me go back and explain something about Lake Seminole. If you put something in Lake Seminole or in the water, probably anywhere in Florida as hot as it is, in 3 to 5 days, it's going to have slime on it that you have to literally wipe off and clean off of it.
The waders, the flashlight, and the jacket all had very little slime buildup.
And I said, I know for a fact that jacket wasn't under that water.
On top of that, Alton had been on that lake every day for months. He'd searched every inch of it, back and forth. How could he or the dozens of searchers have missed something as big and obvious as a pair of waders and a hunting jacket?
I mean, if we ran over something that looked like clothing or anything, we would go back and pull it up, and we never found anything like a jacket.
Why would they turn up now? Several weeks before the jacket and waders were found, Denise Williams walked up the steps into a large colonial-style brick building in Tallahassee. Beside her was her dad, Warren, and Brian Winchester, her and Mike's longtime friend. As they stood in the foyer of the building waiting, a man in a suit and tie came out to greet them.
I saw them as quickly as I can because Marcus seemed to indicate there was a rush to help Denise.
Kurt Hunter was a probate lawyer in town who Marcus Winchester, Brian's dad, often referred his clients to. They'd been business friends for a while. Kurt led his guests through double doors into a conference room with a large table in the center. The mood was somber.
No smiles, and Denise, from what I recall, just sat there with her head down. I don't think she said anything the whole meeting, other than, nice to meet you.
Brian took the lead and filled Kurt in on the background.
Brian's best friend had gone duck hunting by himself and disappeared.
Then he got to the reason they were there. He and his dad, Marcus, sold life insurance policies, and the year previously, they had sold one to Mike. Now, with Mike tragically gone, Denise was down to just her salary as an accountant to support her family. It wasn't enough. She'd need that life insurance.
At the end of it, had asked if I could assist with getting a presumptive death certificate for Denise so she could collect on the insurance proceeds.
Kurt knew that wasn't going to be a straightforward or quick process.
If they're missing from their last known domicile and it's been a continuous period for 5 years and there's no satisfactory explanation after a diligent search of where they could be, then they could be presumed dead.
5 years. Mike had only been missing for 6 months. Brian kept pressing. This wasn't an ordinary missing persons case. He shared information on the exhaustive search efforts, the helicopter, the dive team. Kurt thought it over. Maybe this was the kind of case where things could be hurried along. After the meeting, Kurt kept tossing the case over in his head. All the search efforts would help convince a judge that Mike was likely dead. But there was one other delicate subject that might very well come up.
They had a rocky marriage. If there was any issues, if there's any enemies he had that could have had some issue with him, all that would have had to been disclosed to the judge.
So Kurt had a call with Denise, and he asked, was there anything at all he needed to know about their relationship?
Nothing but glowing things about the marriage and Mike. Their daughter, I think, was 2 at the time. They had discussed having at least one more child that they were going to start planning on trying to have and maybe have another one down the road. So all kind of typical things of a happy, nice marriage.
Even so, Kurt wasn't sure he could convince the judge. It was going to be an uphill fight to get a death certificate so soon after Mike's disappearance.
I definitely saw it as a challenge. It was so rare. There was very, very little case law.
The odds were that they were all just going to have to wait. Then, a couple weeks later, Kurt got a call. It was Denise's dad, Warren. He told Kurt about the waiters. Could it be used as new evidence to help get the death certificate?
He just seemed kind of excited, may not be the proper word, but hopeful maybe that there was, additional information.
Kurt told him he'd add it to the submission.
The waiters, the jacket, everything that was found on that day in June just was kind of icing on the cake to just kind of top everything off and file it.
7 days later, the judge granted the certificate. Mike was presumed dead. And there was only one thing more for Denise and the others to do.
Once they got the death certificate, provided that to Kansas City Life, Denise received the insurance proceeds.
Denise was on track to get a $1.75 million life insurance payout. Even if a judge had ruled that Mike was presumed dead, Cheryl wasn't giving up. She wasn't convinced her son was dead at all, and she certainly wasn't convinced that his disappearance should be a closed case. And since law enforcement wouldn't do anything, Cheryl started knocking hard on another door, the press. Cheryl talked about it years later.
I had been trying to get publicity for Mike's disappearance. I had written the letters to the editor at the Tallahassee Democrat, begging them to do a story about Mike's disappearance.
A month after Mike had been declared presumed dead, those efforts paid off.
Finally, a reporter, Tony Bridges from the Tallahassee Democrat, read my letters to the editor, and he was doing a story about people who were missing locally in Tallahassee area.
Not long after the article came out, Cheryl's phone rang. It was Denise.
She said, "You and Nick need to come over here right now."
Cheryl and her older son, Nick, drove over to Denise's. Even with Mike gone, they still visited the house occasionally to see Mike's daughter, Ansley. As Cheryl and Nick got out of the car, Denise stormed outside.
She was screaming at me. She was mad about the article. And she said, "I don't ever want to hear Mike's name again. I don't ever want to see Mike's picture in the paper again. I don't ever want to know anything you're doing about Mike again. I have to get on with my life."
Cheryl wasn't going to back down. She tried to get Denise to see her side.
And I asked her, I said, "If that were Ansley in the lake, you would just leave her there?" And she said, "I would believe the authorities."
Denise didn't leave it there. She gave Cheryl an ultimatum.
She said, "If you persist in trying to get a criminal investigation, you will lose Ansley, my granddaughter, Mike's daughter."
The threat hung in the air. Losing her granddaughter, the one person that still connected her to Mike, that was terrifying. But as they drove away, Cheryl didn't feel she had a choice. She'd made progress by getting a journalist to pay attention to the case. It was a small step, but it took her closer to finding the truth about Mike. She had to keep going. It was a quiet day in 2004 at the sheriff's office in Marianna, a small town an hour west of Tallahassee. Homicide detective Derek Wester was sitting at his desk.
My boss man called me and said, "Hey, I need you to talk to this woman."
His boss didn't tell him much, but Detective Wester knew she had a reputation among the Tallahassee law enforcement. She was the grieving mother who just wouldn't let go. It had been 4 years, and she still insisted there'd been a conspiracy to make her son go away, when everyone knew Mike had just been an unlucky guy who drowned on a duck hunting trip.
Everybody called her crazy and all that. She sometimes talked about dreams and stuff like that.
Detective Wester had been part of the search for Mike Williams. He had pretty much forgotten about the case until he found himself face-to-face with Cheryl Williams, pale blonde pigtails and all. Cheryl Williams, however, had not stopped searching for her son for a single day. Since her confrontation with Denise in 2001, Denise had limited Cheryl's time with her granddaughter, Ansley, to just 30 minutes a week. But Cheryl was undeterred. She spoke to reptile experts, put up missing person signs all over town, and told anyone who would listen about her new discoveries. But it wasn't until now, in March of 2004, that law enforcement finally invited her in to give an official statement. Detective Wester showed her into a conference room, unsure of what to expect. As soon as they sat down, Cheryl began to speak.
She started telling us her story, just citing it out by memory. I mean, I done read about 10 or 11 pages of notes. I don't know, I kept interrupting this time. She said, "Well, I got it all wrote down."
Cheryl handed Detective Wester a 27-page report.
She called a synopsis of everything that happened from day one to pretty much the present.
Cheryl went through the details one by one. How Brian had told Mike at the last minute that he couldn't go hunting. how Mike had gone out to Lake Seminole alone anyway, how the waders and jacket had suddenly popped up at the most opportune time. And of course, Cheryl talked about Denise and what she'd managed to do.
It was really a sticking point with her of how fast that she was able to get him declared presumptively to be dead. She does it in 6 months, 7 months, something like that.
For more than an hour, Detective Wester listened as Cheryl detailed everything that happened. When she finally finished speaking, his mind was made up.
You just kind of felt like you believed her, and then she starts putting two and two together, and then you're like, wow.
But believing Cheryl and cracking open the Mike Williams case were two very different things. As Cheryl left the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, a plan was forming in Detective Wester's head. A plan to look deeper into her claims. And what he'd learn would throw those closest to Mike into question.
He said he had a gun in the truck and he was going to go get it and basically kill me and Denise on the spot.
That's on the next episode of Over My Dead Body, Gone Hunting. From Wondery, this is episode 2 of 6 of Over My Dead Body, Gone Hunting, a series about the extremes of love and betrayal. Over My Dead Body, Gone Hunting is hosted by me, Jennifer Portman. This series is written and reported by Eric Barton. Producer is Denise Chan. Senior producer is Russell Finch. Story editor is Eric Benson. Consulting producer is me, Jennifer Portman. Production assistance by Evangeline Barras. Sound design and mixing by Michelle Macklem. Music supervisor is Scott Velasquez for Frizon Sync. Fact-checking by Annika Robbins. Senior managing producer is Lata Pandya. Managing producer is Olivia Weber. And coordinating producer is Heather Beloga. Executive producers are George Lavender, Marshall Louie, and Jen Sargent for Wondery.